Have you ever wondered what it would be like if Gary Oldman played a little person who was twin brothers with Matthew McConaughey, who very much looks 10 years younger than him in this movie, and Patricia Arquette's there for some reason, and you also get Peter Dinklage as a French extremist communist? It's it's something Ross had me watch. Definitely something. So, Tiptoes is a 2002 movie where Gary Oldman plays a little person. Yeah. Yeah, someone decided that was a good idea. Now, I love Gary Oldman. Like, Gary Oldman, I have on record said he's one of my favorite actors. There are tons of roles I love him in. This, I mean, he does what he can with the script, I guess, but there's really not much good I could say about it. Um, so the basic plot is Matthew McConaughey was born to two little people and his twin brothers with Gary Oldman. Now McConaughey is not a little person in this. The genes skipped him, and he's dating Kate Beckinsale, who and the he hasn't told her anything about his family until the events of this movie. And first of all, how does that happen? Like, they're gonna get married, they're having a kid. Well, you learn they're having a kid in this movie. Like, how's this not really come up before? She's like, hey, it's a little sketchy that I know nothing about your family. And he's just like, hey, stop asking questions. Um, so the plot goes on with there's a subplot with Gary Oldman potentially getting back together with an ex who's also a little person who you are led to believe is a prostitute, kind of, and she was played by a porn star. Um, who and she ends up having sex with someone in full view of a party, and Gary Oldman catches her. Uh, yeah, this movie, it's there's maybe three redeeming factors of this movie. Now, this movie, I'm sure the writer had good intentions as to maybe this, like, I think they were trying to make a movie to, I don't know. There's not much good I could say about it. Like, I'd like to believe the whoever wrote this was like, hey, dwarfism is a vastly misunderstood uh, disability, and we want to shed light on it through this movie. Well, he did a really bad job at it. Like, oh my god, some of the lines Kate Beckinsale's given to say, holy crap, the amount of ableism. Um, so, redeeming factors of this movie, Peter Dinklage. First of all, Dinklage is having a relationship with Patricia Arquette, where she's like kind of a hippie. He's French. He is an extremist. Like, he pulls a gun on a hotel owner and they beat the crap out of him. Um, he's a communist. He believes in violent revolutions. And he's also a huge chauvinist. So, like, huh, that's pretty interesting. And I'm pretty sure they're just there for comic relief because they have zero impact on the plot, pretty much. Nothing. I want the story of those two characters. That's what I want to see more than this 4.3 on Rotten Tomatoes movie. So, some conversations that happen in this movie. The one that's gonna come up a lot is when Matthew McConaughey and Kate Beckinsale are in bed, and she has now met his parents and everything, and she's becoming more comfortable with the idea of dwarfism. Um, she goes, "Hey, have you ever been sexually active with a little person?" And he goes, "Oh, just kid stuff, playing, sitting in a circle, playing doctor." And her response, I shit you not, this is her response, is, so you had a circle jerk with little people. I would love to see that. Really? Really, writers? Really? In in what world? In what world does that bit of dialogue work remotely? Like, it's hilarious. It's freaking hilarious. But I just want to know what producer or whatever read that script and went, huh, this is writing right here. Like, yes, this is acceptable writing for a movie. I just want to know. I want to know who thought that was a good idea. Um, Now, the other thing that's awesome is Kate Beckinsale's lucky hat. Ross mentioned it in his introduction video. The lucky hat shows up for one scene, and I agree with Ross. I'm like, hey, she should have been wearing that this whole movie. This entire movie, she should have been wearing that lucky hat. So Matthew McConaughey is totally unlikable in this, pretty much. He's, like, for most of the movie, he's fine. Though he does have a line where he's like, I train firefighters to be cadets. And, fire is a pretty much recession-proof business, so I'm always pretty busy. Okay. I mean, you're right, but that's not something you should, like, that's a bad way to put it. Like, the way he just described that is he's like, hey, I need fires to pretty much constantly be happening for me to have a good business. Now, I don't know if you know much about fires, but they destroy things and kill people. So, that's a thing. Other things in this movie. So, I guess I really should talk more about Gary Oldman. Alright, so the way they made him look like a little person is he walked on his knees. And they gave him kind of a hunchback and a cane. And I think they did, like, prosthetics to, like, hold his shoulders back and stuff to try and, I don't know, create the illusion. But there's a slight issue in that his arms are very distracting in this. Like, they couldn't do anything about his arms. And it raises the question, there's so many side actors that in this that are little people, including Dinklage. Why couldn't we cast one of them? I mean, Dinklage would have been perfect in Gary Oldman's role, if we're being honest. Now, this is 2002, so this is pre-Game of Thrones, Peter Dinklage, and I think only a little. It's right around the time The Elf came out, which is where Will Ferrell calls Peter Dinklage an angry elf. So, Peter Dinklage isn't exactly a star, but he does have dreadlocks at one point. So, huh? You could come to the movie to see Peter Dinklage have dreadlocks. Yeah, so Oldman does his best with it, but I mean, even like they use camera angles and stuff to try and give the impression, but even though Lord of the Rings was around to make the example of how to do these camera angles, it just can't work with Gary Oldman, walking around on his knees because inherently it looks silly. It looks silly the whole time. Like, there's not a point where, like, some people have looked at this movie and said, I think Gary Oldman in an interview said, he's like, the amount of prosthesis, he's like, I think it was groundbreaking. I'm like, do you, Gary? Do you believe that line you just said? Because I don't. And I think you're a reasonable person, and I don't think you believe it either. And, yeah, just overall, like, looking at, like, how the direction is, it's competent, I guess. The editing, whatever, like, you could tell it was made by professionals, but just everything this movie tried to do, it failed at, and it failed miserably. Oh, also, spoiler alert, at the end, when Kate Beckinsale has her kid, they find out the baby does have dwarfism, and Matthew McConaughey gets upset because he remembers how much pain Gary Oldman's character was as a baby and as like growing up. And what was Matthew McConaughey's response? To leave, of course, because Matthew McConaughey is a dick in this movie. And this is so McConaughey had his resurgence in like True Detective, Lincoln Lawyer, then Dallas Buyers Club. Like Matthew McConaughey has burst on as like, yeah, he's a very good actor now. But this was 2002 Matthew McConaughey, and he had roles in the 90s like Amistad, where he was very good. This was prime rom-com McConaughey. This was like Failure to Launch McConaughey, Ghost of a Girlfriend's Past McConaughey. So didn't have the prestige that he does today, really. And it shows because like I watched some of the trailers on this movie, and they almost marketed it as a rom-com, and it was not. I mean, I thought it was funny, but that's mostly because Dinklage's character is so ridiculous that everything he does, I'm like, oh man, they actually put that in a movie. But yeah, so at the end, McConaughey leaves. He tries to get back together with Kate Beckinsale. She says no, and then her and Gary Oldman get together, and he raises the child, and that's the end. Also, Patricia Arquette just kind of leaves Dinklage for some reason. Yeah, again, Dinklage and Patricia Arquette's story does not influence the plot at all. So I'm glad it was there because it was the most entertaining part of the movie. But at the same time, I think they deserve their own movie. All right, so that's about all I have to say on Tiptoes. Ross, this was an interesting choice to say the least. So I'm going to have some more animated stuff coming for Ross, and I think it's going to be pretty good next week. All right, see you guys later.